So recently on the channel, I had an upload comparing the video quality from the brand new iPhone 14 Pro Max to the not so brand new iPhone 12 Pro Max. And in that video, I feel I did a pretty good comparison going between all three different lenses in a ton of different lighting and filming scenarios with different types of action going on. But in editing that video, I feel there's a couple things that I might have missed out on. So here we are for part 2 of the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus iPhone 12 Pro Max video comparison. And right off the bat is one of the things that I feel I could have done that I didn't quite have time for or show, and that is an HDR video comparison. So right now we are filming in HDR, which is 10-bit 422 Dolby Vision on both iPhones. It was introduced, I believe, with the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and what you're seeing is a comparison between the two of them. And I'll do a couple tricks here because I'm at the skate park once again, just to highlight any differences there might be between all three different lenses. And then there's going to be some more comparisons between digital zoom and practical zoom and a lot of different things like that. And another thing I want to make note of here real quickly so you guys can pay attention to it throughout is that while editing the video before, I noticed some audio differences. It feels like the 14 Pro Max is cutting out the background noise better than the iPhone 12 Pro Max, but maybe the iPhone 12 Pro Max has a richer, louder audio. Not entirely sure how I feel about that one, but I do know that it is a noticeable difference, and I'll be switching back and forth between the audio from each of them, and I'll have icons on the screen somewhere down there that shows when that switch happens. So let's get to some more comparisons of the HDR video between these two cameras. So there we have a nice little test of HDR on both iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 12 Pro Max. And now we're getting a little bit of audio talking to the camera in the ultra wide. And so another thing I wanted to test on these cameras has to do with the zoom. So you're seeing right now between the two telephotos of these cameras where the 14 Pro Max has a 3x telephoto and the 12 Pro Max has a 2.5x telephoto. And with the introduction of these new phones from Apple also comes the introduction of a new zoom mode, 2x. So with the new 14 Pro and Pro Max, we have a 48 megapixel main sensor up from 12 megapixels previously. And the way this 2x zoom function is achieved is just by using the center 12 megapixels on that main sensor instead of all 48. So Apple is calling this basically an optical zoom because you end up with a 2x image. They're also calling it lossless and saying that you're not losing out on any light. And this is something I definitely didn't think about testing against the 12 Pro Max, but I figured we could compare this 2x compared to the 2.5x, which is a dedicated telephoto zoom lens, and see if there's any quality differences. And another thing that we can compare this to is the 1x lens on this camera at 48 megapixels, utilizing the entire sensor, just zoomed in 200%, because according to Apple, we should see a better image quality on the 2x than zooming in 200% on the 48 megapixel using the entire sensor. And then we can also compare that to the 12 Pro Max at 1x, zooming that in 200% as well, just to see if we're actually gaining anything by this or if it's just some fancy wording and marketing tricks from Apple. And just for kicks here, let's do 2.5 on the 14 Pro Max versus 2.5 on the 12 Pro Max. Obviously, this is going to be digitally zoomed in even further than just using these center pixels, but I thought it'd be a fun comparison here to just see how a more digital and zooming in cropping on the sensor compares versus an actual lens at 2.5. The next tests that we need to do are digital zoom tests. This is something I hadn't even thought about at all in my previous comparison. So right now we are on the 1x camera on both 14 and 12, and we're zoomed in to 3x. That is as far in as the 1x camera can go on the 12, and actually the 14 can go even a little further. So let's do a couple tricks here to have a comparison for more than just me talking, and then we'll zoom in even further on the 14. So this next comparison is a little out there. I might have to get even further away for you to be able to see me, but I have the iPhone 14 Pro Max in 1x, 12 Pro Max in 2.5, 12 is zoomed in digitally to 7x, and the 14 at 1x is zoomed in all the way digitally to 6x. That's how far it goes on this. This is a pretty out there comparison because it's one lens telephoto on the 12 versus the main lens on the 14, but we can see them side by side and how they compare and what you'll get if you zoom in on these, because you have more options, it seems, on the 14. And since we have the ability to, now let's compare the 3x telephoto from the 14 to the 2.5x telephoto on the 12, digitally zoomed both of them to 7x. The 14 actually goes to 9x, so we'll do that next. Alright, so now we are at 9x on the 14 Pro zoomed in from the 3x telephoto versus 7x on the 12 Pro Max zoomed in from its 2.5x telephoto. This at this point is more of a comparison between the furthest extent that these cameras can be zoomed in with each other than it is quality between the same focal lengths. You're hearing the audio from me about 25, 30 feet away from the camera, and a ton of other stuff going on, cars and trucks and semis driving by, as well as me being pretty far away at these focal lengths that it's digitally zoomed to. So this is more of knowing what you're going to get at the furthest extent of things if you pick up one of these cameras than it is about comparing the same focal lengths. And at this point, the only other digital zoom that we need to compare is that of the ultra wide on these phones. And I'll be totally honest, I don't think anyone should be digitally zooming using the ultra wide unless you're already recording and you have to, because it won't switch between lenses and you're in 4K 60 and it's some extenuating circumstances because you have the main camera, which is 1x, and then the telephoto, which is 3 or 2.5x, depending upon which of these phones you have. So here is your comparison between digital zoom of the ultra wide, and now we're going to move on to something else. So stabilization is something that I addressed in my previous comparison video, but I feel I didn't quite do it the justice that I should have. The 14 has the second iteration of the sensor shift stabilization that the 12 introduced, which means that it should be better. And because I was rolling on my bike following somebody, it was already good enough, and I didn't test it the way I should have. So now we're going to do a walking, running test following my buddy Dylan over here, doing a couple tricks with the main camera, telephoto, and the ultra wide, just to see if there's any noticeable differences there. So here is a walking test. Walking the entire time. And here we have a straight up running test. And this time we have an actually like full out sprinting test here. And this time we have an actually like full out sprinting test here. And this time we have an actually like full out sprinting test here. And here we have the walking test with the ultra wides. Perfect. Sweet. And here we have the running test with the ultra wides. Hopefully that went okay. And here we have the running test with the ultra wides. And here we have the running test with the ultra wides. All right, so here is a walking test with the telephotos. Perfect. All right, here we are, telephoto, testing the stabilization. I'm actually running. Oh, that's horrible. There's no way that doesn't look bad. All right, here we are, telephoto, testing the stabilization. I'm actually running. Oh, that's horrible. There's no way that doesn't look bad. All right, here we are, telephoto, testing the stabilization. I'm actually running. Oh, that's horrible. There's no way that doesn't look bad. The stabilization between the two of them is actually a pretty significant difference just watching between the main cameras on the two of them. And I haven't had a chance to check out the others yet, but I have checked out all of the previous footage before the stabilization. And there's a couple conclusions that I could gather from this. One, the HDR on the 14 Pro seemed to be a little bit brighter, which when put with the exact same color correction that I used on the 14 initially led to a more pleasing image than when it was applied to the 12 Pro Max. Not to say that you couldn't edit a little bit further and try to match them up, just when they had the exact same color, it looked a little bit better. Then when it comes to comparing the lenses on these things in the new kind of virtual 2x lens, I noticed that it wasn't super far off in situations like this one that you're seeing right now where I'm just talking and the subject is pretty close to the camera. But then when it came to things further away, like the riding that was happening, you could definitely see more detail in the 12 Pro Max using that dedicated lens and sensor versus just using the center of a sensor on the 14 Pro Max. So that was one difference that I felt I could see. Then when we talk about digital zoom, this is where things get a little bit more ambiguous. So when it comes to comparing the 12 Pro Max and the 14 Pro Max using the digital zoom, I felt like there were certain instances where of course you see an improvement between the 14 from the 12, just because it's got a better, bigger sensor to where you see more detail. So if we're talking about using the main sensor and digitally zooming to the same place on both of these, it was definitely better on the 14. Like for example, at that 3x mark, which is the maxed out main sensor digital zoom of the 12. But when we go to the telephoto, this is where things I feel are a little bit more inconclusive, but conclusive at the same time. So I genuinely believe that the telephoto on the 12 Pro Max is actually a bit better than the telephoto on the 14 Pro Max. We get 2.5x, which I am not considering as a factor in this decision. I'm actually considering the amount of detail that we can see whenever you're looking at these images directly compared to each other, as well as the low light performance. The low light performance on the 12 Pro Max just seemed to be better than on the 14. So when it came to the digital zoom, I feel that that was also somewhat noticeable, but then there's also the fact that you can go all the way up to 9x digital zoom on the telephoto of the 14 versus I think 7 or 6 on the 12 Pro Max. And just being able to zoom in further, I think could be better in some situations, and this is definitely a weird comparison here. And another thing to talk about here is the audio. Obviously you're hearing some wind noise when I'm doing this. I'm just kind of sending it, and you're getting what you're getting audio wise. But between the two of them, I definitely feel like there is a difference in the audio between the 14 and 12. The 12 seems to be a little bit louder and richer, but has more background noise, and the 14 has less background noise. The wind cut is a little bit better, it feels, but it feels like it's a tiny bit more muffled than the 12 Pro Max. One other small but could be significant to you thing that I noticed in this comparison is a sharpness and keeping things in focus when they're moving aspect. So in my original comparison, when I would freeze frame, when I was at the dirt jumps in the woods, you could see that the 12 Pro Max was a little bit blurry with some motion blur, but the 14 Pro Max, when I would do that, would be still, it would be more sharp and keep things in focus for longer, especially on the ultra wide where it has autofocus, whereas on the 12 Pro Max, it's just a fixed focus lens. So that is definitely something that you could take into account. For example, if you're filming your kids or something with any kind of action to it that you might want to take a screenshot of that frozen action, the 14 could be something to take into account because it seems that in more situations you get a sharper still whenever you pause it. So taking my previous video into account, as well as the findings from this video, aside from the stabilization of the other two lenses, aside from the main lens, I feel that the differences between these cameras may not be enough for you to want to upgrade if you have the 13 or the 12 Pro Max. Because when you look at these things compared side by side, unless you're talking about low light specifically, you really have to zoom in to see the differences. Yes, there is definitely more detail in the 14 Pro Max. Yes, there is definitely more depth of field. But when you compare it to the 12 Pro Max, if you're looking at these things as standalone images, I think that you may not be able to tell enough of a difference between the two of them to make it worth upgrading for the camera alone. Now, if you're someone like me who uses your phone camera on a daily basis, or you use it for business at all, like a YouTube channel or taking pictures or video or anything like that, then maybe you could consider it and justify it. But for a normal person, I don't know if all of these things added up are enough. For me, I would say that they are, but I'm a camera video nerd. So I think that's a decision you have to make for yourself. And when you're talking about the low light, I think this is the most significant difference between these, in that the low light of the 14 Pro Max on the telephoto and the ultra wide, they definitely have a significant improvement over the 12 Pro Max. Apple says something like 4 times or 3 times the improvement. You can see it there. It's very good, and the quality there is noticeable. So I think it's up to you. If all of these things that we've talked about add up to an upgrade that you feel is worthy over your phone, maybe your battery is going out on your 12 Pro or your previous phone, and you think it's worth it, well, I think that's a decision that you can make. So hopefully you found this useful, and I appreciate you watching this. I make BMX videos every single day on this YouTube channel, so if you found enjoyment of any of the riding, consider subscribing down below, and that'll mean that we'll see you tomorrow for another one. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I hope I did a good job on this comparison for you to help you make an informed decision on your next phone purchase. Thank you all for watching again. We'll see you potentially